in the unit responsible for, among others, implementation of the AggregateEU service. This is a workshop which is focusing on the presentation of PRISMA, our service provider, who is implementing the platform. The presentation will take most of the time. However, there will be sufficient time at the end of the workshop for your specific questions. Just before we get into the program of today, you have received your agendas. We will give a few presentations on related aspects that are important for you to know before we jump into the presentation of the tool. The rules of the game today, we are many connected. There was a huge interest to join this workshop, about which we are really very happy. However, that also means that there is always a risk of a crash of the system. But in case that happens, you are kicked out, or there is an issue, you just connect again to using the same link. What we are also requesting you to do is to keep yourself muted unless you are given the floor to speak. Throughout the presentations, feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. We will collect them for the Q&A session at the end of the workshop. In case you really want to speak, just raise your hand. But please note that we have only 3 hours, probably many questions, many participants. So only request for the floor in case it is absolutely necessary. We are also asking you to turn off your video. We are happy to see your faces, but that doesn't make the workshop today much easier. So please keep that off. In case you are speaking, of course, you can switch your video back on. In the chat, please use it for questions, constructive comments. In case you would like to advertise your company, this is not the place to do that. You will be kindly helped out of the workshop in case that happens. So please do not abuse the fact that there is a chat and many companies also online. This is also to inform you that this session is being recorded so that those who couldn't follow or those that would like to rewatch, then they can do that. I think with that, we will just start the workshop. We would also like to thank you already for the questions that you sent us in writing, because the presentations have been already tailored to provide that those questions are answered, but we are also then we'll go back to those during the Q&A session. So let me provide you a bit of a context on how this meeting was born and was meant to be. You also see the agenda for today. So we, after the introductory words, will have a short presentation about the company cooperation, also known as the possibility to form consortia. You will hear that there are a bit of a lighter approaches in which we propose to form company cooperation in order to support and help demand aggregation inside and outside of the platform, so that also smaller buyers and smaller players can take part. And then the presentation of PRISMA will take us until about 11. We will provide a lot of information, and as I mentioned at the beginning, feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. After a short pit stop or coffee break and tea break, we will then go into the more Q&A session, trying to answer the questions that you've been raising during the day. So in terms of the context of this meeting, you will see from the presentations that the presentation is focused and targeted mainly at the buyer side, so those companies and those players who wish to enter on the platform their demand and how they can cooperate, what are the steps through which the platform can be used, from registration to demand aggregation and joint tendering. So the focus is mainly on those. Based on the regulation that allows us to have this platform and the basis for demand aggregation and joint purchasing excludes companies that have any links or ownership with Russian entities. So this is something that you need to consider in case that is the case with you. Those companies are not allowed to participate on the platform, register or follow any of the consecutive steps. And this is also just to highlight that while if you are a supplier or plan to participate in the process as a supplier offering your gas, you are free to join and listen to this meeting, that we will provide a bit less information on those aspects of the platform. The registration part will in any case be also valid for you. So you will not be your participation will not be completely without use. So if we go to the next slide, please. So what is the EU Energy Platform and what the focus of today's meeting is? So the EU Energy Platform was set up last year. The main objective is to increase the transparency and increase the coordination of gas purchases within the EU. We would like to avoid huge price spikes and also uncoordinated purchases of gas and competing for the same amount of volumes and thereby pushing up these prices. The governance of the EU Energy Platform is relatively complex, but that makes possible that all the views and all the aspects are considered during its design and implementation as well as running. We do have an industrial advisory board. This is a selection of companies who are interested in taking part in demand aggregation and joint purchasing. This industry advisory group is an expert group and provides opinions and feedbacks, acts as a sounding board for the ideas under the energy platform, provides us the market knowledge and intelligence for us in order to make sure that the activities of the platform and especially the design of the tool is such that it harms or intervenes in the market the least possible. We do have an ad hoc steering board. This is a high-level group of member states chaired by Vice President Šefčovič, and the overall objective of this group is to provide a bit of a steering to the energy platform activities, which apart from the demand aggregation and joint purchasing also includes optimization of infrastructure activities, looking at transparency as well as international outreach on the government-to-government level between the EU and third country suppliers. And then the third element, which is important to mention, is the regional groups that we have established under the EU Energy Platform. This is where we collect first of all, this is where the actions to optimize infrastructure are being implemented. This is the context. But this is also where we gather the information on the specificities of the individual regions when it comes to their preferences, their possibilities to diversify, their preferences regarding demand aggregation or their needs in terms of those activities, including company cooperation as well as financial guarantees in case they need it. So these are the three main groups that provide input to the demand aggregation and joint purchasing as a process and as a concept. And then in the middle, we do have on the chart the service provider, and this service provider is PRISMA, who we have today. And that big block in the middle is something that we are going to talk about today. Something that is important to mention, that this service provider is focused on the activities of demand aggregation as well as matching of demand and supply offers. But from that point on, the negotiations on contracts would happen outside of the platform. That's not where either the service provider or the Commission takes part. So this is completely up to the companies to see whether they manage to negotiate contracts that are appropriate and attractive enough for them. And these negotiations can happen either individually between companies, or it can also happen that there is on behalf of a group of companies, and this is where actually the next presentation will go into. What are these group of companies or cooperation of companies that can happen and that are possible under this scheme in order to get contracts with suppliers which are attractive enough. I think that with that I have given enough context. Of course, if you have questions with regards to the general context, you can also put them in the chat box. But without much further ado, I would actually pass the floor to my colleague Bartek, who will explain you what this cooperation of companies would mean for you. Thanks.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I will be speaking about this topic of cooperation of companies, why we have it, why we speak about this now, and also before actually the presentation of PRISMA is, first slide please, is that we know that there will be, in order to access AggregateEU and demand aggregation, for some companies may require extra assistance and extra services. And also in the regulation, in the solidarity regulation, we do have a specific article also that precisely addresses this issue. It speaks about gas purchasing consortia, and it allows, or it gives the possibility also to facilitate access to demand aggregation for some companies, mainly companies that maybe have not enough demand by themselves, or they need some extra expertise, extra support, for example, in the area of transporting gas. And without these services, they will not be able effectively to participate. How this should happen in general terms, such cooperation should be voluntary and also of temporary nature, linked to the this is in general linked to the application of the regulation. It should of course also respect the competition rules, and this is where we also from the Commission side are looking into it to design processes that will be comply with these provisions. Also, this cooperation shall have open form. They should not lead to some exclusivity for some companies in the platform and outside of the platform and so on. When we see it relevant, I think the most relevant it will be that for a moment, as Monica mentioned, when the companies have to sign contracts, when they really, after the tender is done, after the matching is done, there will be this reality world check, and companies will go to the suppliers, will need to have to negotiate contracts, sign them, and finally transport gas to the point of consumption, and they often may not be able to do it alone, and that's why this discussion. However, during the last weeks, also discussing with the industry, but also from also reality, simply time is running, and what it can be at a certain for a moment discarded is that probably it will not be enough time now to set up a full joint venture or legal entity that will allow the companies cooperation and in that way access the AggregateEU. So for a moment we discarded this model. But we have two others, and I will start with the third one, what we called agent on behalf. What is this model? This agent on behalf supposed to be companies, for example, midstreamer companies, that will be offering services to companies that are registered on the AggregateEU and they aggregate demand at the platform, but maybe they will be seeking for transport services or will be seeking for services like balancing or other services, maybe even to negotiate, help them negotiating contracts. These companies may be still interested to sign themselves contracts with suppliers, but may be seeking help from other companies. And this is where this agent on behalf could work. It will be simply helping to meet the demand in supply after the tender is done, after matching is done. It will help maybe companies that to sign up the contracts, what they do then by themselves, but with the extra services from for the service provider, from this agent on behalf. The second model is the central buyer model. Here, the concept is that the central buyer will be the company actually signing the contract with the supplier. So the companies that will be interested in it will be looking for the central buyer and will be agreeing that they provide demand, but the contract with the supplier is signed and negotiated by the central buyer. So it's a model that is going a step further. The companies, the buyers will be aggregating demand and somebody else will sign the contract for them. Next slide, please. These models, they need to be subject to certain basic conditions. First of all, the company that offer the services and participate in general on the platform, they cannot be seller and buyer at the same time. So indeed, there would need to be a decision to act on either side. Also, if companies decide, for example, a central buyer groups companies, then this demand should be submitted to the platform, to AggregateEU platform. And important element, the information that is being exchanged between the central buyer or the agent on behalf and the companies should happen on bilateral basis and should be limited to what is necessary. Also, in the case of the central buyer model, the central buyer should not derive rents on the commodity of gas, but rather charge for the services that it is offering. So for transport, for balancing, for negotiating, but not for the gas itself. This is an important element that is contained also as a part of the regulation, and we would see that if this cooperation, the central buyers model take place, that they pass on the benefit from signing the contract, buying the contract to the buyers. And the last slide, what next? So now you will hear soon the presentation of PRISMA, how the all AggregateEU works and how these models are being then taken up into the AggregateEU. To do so, PRISMA will also publish a call of expression of interest, seeking for companies that are interested to provide such services. And they will do it then on their website. We see that there will be probably end of March when this will happen. But now I think I give further the floor, and you will hear how this links with the AggregateEU platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bartek. So this was a presentation on the consortia. We already see some questions coming up. We are going to answer some of them already in writing. And let me then give the floor now to Paolo, who will, on behalf of PRISMA, will present the tool.
Good morning to all of you. I'm Palma Face, and today I will guide you through what has been done until from the 1st of January this year, because we started at the beginning of the year with DG Energy to develop aggregated EU until now. So maybe we can go to the next slide. What you will see in my presentation is the result of a discussion with the colleagues of DG Energy, the decision taken by the colleagues of DG Energy, and the initial feedback received from some of the stakeholders. What you will see in this presentation may change in the future based on the continued discussion that we will have with stakeholders and based on the final decision that will be taken by DG Energy. What we will do on PRISMA, on the specific area that will be called aggregated EU, we will publish all the guidance and documentation that will make you allowed to participate, and hopefully with not too much effort. Maybe we can go to the next slide. A quick introduction about PRISMA, because I assume not all of you knows what PRISMA is. PRISMA is a company created in 2012 by several gas European TSOs. We are now present in 20 markets, so we are offering services for the market of capacity. At the beginning was transportation capacity, now we extend our services also to storage capacity, and at the end of the year we start also offering services for LNG operator. We are present in 20 markets, and we are really proud to have more than 700 ships already registered on PRISMA and using the services of the platform. Today we have 24 shareholders. We are all TSOs, gas TSOs, European gas TSOs, and more than 3,000 users are acting on PRISMA platform. So you can imagine that we are already covering a significant part of the European countries. This is PRISMA in a nutshell. What I would like now to ask Laurent is to introduce which were the North Stars that DG Energy gave us for the development of AggregateEU.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Laurent Toubache, and I work for the European Commission in the unit in charge of the implementation of the EU energy platform. As Paolo mentioned, one of the first steps that we took in implementing this contract was to define what is our North Star. A North Star being defined symbolically as the guiding principle to implement the project, considering the objective defined in the Council regulation adopted in December last year. So as you can see on this slide, our core objective is to contribute to security of supply by building a solution that is bridging extraordinary emergency situations for winter 2023-2024 with a focus on LNG. I think there are a few elements where we need to take a second in order to give more information there. First of all, on the security of supply aspect. So indeed, we do not intend to revamp or reshuffle market functioning. We want to focus on security of supply, Security of supply being understood in the broad sense, meaning that sufficient volumes at the desired destination are available at affordable prices. So it means that there is the security of the volumes, but there is also a question of affordability. On the timing as well, we mentioned the extraordinary emergency situations. So indeed, the solution will have initially a duration that covers the time required for the restabilization of the market. So we talk about the winter 2023-2024 and potentially as well the refilling of storage in 2024. And finally, there is the focus on LNG because we have seen last year, so in 2022, that LNG played a critical role in replacing disrupted Russian volumes. And therefore, as part of the instrument, the LNG volume will have a key contribution. So these guiding principles, they are trickling down into the 4 building blocks of the solution we are building. The first one is the undertaking registration, where these principles translate into equality of treatment and inclusiveness. In a sense, we want to make sure that the solution is open to everybody and treated equally. Now, it means that the entry barriers that we will define in order to register on the platform will be relatively low in order to maximize the number of participants, being market players or industrial consumers. But there is a validation process in place in order to minimize the settlement risk and also to reduce the potential misuse of the solution we are developing. While we want to keep entry barriers relatively low, we also want to make sure that participants realize that they have a responsibility to have access to the necessary capabilities to lift gas volumes on the wholesale. These capabilities, they relate to their ability to actually take title of gas, to ship, to balance, and to perform all ancillary services required for the wholesale operation. Now, in terms of registration, the registration would be performed in 2 steps. The first one is an administrative steps, where the company would have to provide information, regular establishment information, such as the act of establishment, the power of attorney. They need to sign up to the terms of condition, and they would have to provide an EIC number. So, and the EIC number, as you probably know, you can obtain it from NSOG or for a local issuing office. The second step of the registration is in terms of financial check and eligibility conditions. The eligibility conditions are defined in Article 8 of the Council regulation and relate to the ownership and control of the entities. And in order to abide by these terms, the applicant will be required to actually sign a declaration on honor and to provide, if required, additional documents in order to prove the elements indicated on the declaration on honor. As my colleagues mentioned, there is a possibility to have cooperation framework on AggregateEU. And so at that stage, we would invite the participant to indicate the composition of the consortium or the companies that are part of this cooperation framework as part of the registration. And as mentioned, the central purchaser or the agent on behalf will be mentioned and advertised on the platform, so companies can express their interest to be acting as agent on behalf or central buyers, but also company can express interest to actually link with these companies and benefit from their services. Now moving on to the next slide. The second building block is the aggregation of demand and transparency. And how the North Star would translate there is mainly in the sense that we want to have highly standardized product. So it's flat wholesale product that would be proposed on AggregateEU. And Paolo will detail the nature of this product later on. The idea is not to have really tailored product where the possibility of matching would be reduced, but something which is very streamlined. There is a minimum quantity. There is a minimum quantity that will define the possibility for players to act alone or as part of a cooperation framework on the platform. The minimum quantity that is defined is needed in order to strike the balance between what we want to see as a maximum number of participants, but also mitigate the multiplicity of contract stemming from the matching principle. And also we will have a mechanism to prevent market manipulation. My colleague Bartek was mentioning that an entity cannot play at the same time on the buying and the selling side for a single tender. This is one of them. Others are also intended to be put in place. For the tendering process and matching, what AggregateEU will do is actually put in contact prospective buyers and sellers. The negotiation, the final negotiation and the contracting, as already mentioned, would take place outside of the platform. And finally, the fourth building block is the procurement transparency. And there is a need to make the information available to the member state and DG Energy on what happened on the platform, but only the non-confidential or the non-commercially sensitive information. Voilà, I think that concludes my part on the North Star.
Thanks a lot, Laurent. I will continue with some additional high-level information. So, as Laurent mentioned, these services, aggregated EU, will be available for all the interested company that will fulfill the minimum requirement that we have defined. This minimum requirement will be mainly in the registration and in the subscription phase. It's clear that what will be done on aggregated EU is not the final step. The potential buyer will have to be able also to manage the quantity that will be matched via aggregated EU and hopefully will be concluded as contract. So that means that the companies will have to have specific organization and operation know-how to be able to move the natural gas that is being bought. We are not going to charge any fee to any company. The cost of aggregated EU will be covered by the DG Energy, so it's a free of charge services. And what is clear, based on the indication that DG Energy gave us at the beginning of this project in the North Stars, we don't want to influence any trading activities in the European countries. So every trading activities will be done outside aggregated EU. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Here, we will start deep diving in the different phases of aggregated EU. As mentioned before, we have two initial steps. One is the registration on the PRISMA platform. The market participant or the interested company that are not registered yet in PRISMA will have to register in order to prove to give us information about the establishment, the identity of the company, and the authorization of the user to be active on the PRISMA platform. As a second step, your company will have to subscribe to the specific services that we are going to develop for aggregated EU, and in this case, you will have to provide us additional information that I will detail afterwards. Once the two initial steps will be fulfilled, we will go real in the phases of aggregated EU. That is the demand aggregation, the matching, the contracting part that is done outside the platform, as it was mentioned before, and finally also the procurement of transparency that we must provide to the European institution, especially to DG Energy. The process that you see here, so these 4 steps, may be repeated in the time frame of the next 12 to 18 months. So it will not be one-shot process, but in the discussion that we had with DG Energy, we have a clear indication that this process may be repeated in time. If we can go to the next slide. So now we start with the operation information, how the registration is going to be on PRISMA. You will have, if you're not registered already in PRISMA, this is information that we will be provided by the companies that are not registered yet in PRISMA. You will have to give us the information about the company, so the name of the company, the registered address of the company, the country of registration, and as mentioned before, a mandatory information if your company is registered in one European country, also the EIC code. It's important for us to have this information because it's a fundamental, unique identifier of the European gas market, and it's mandatory for the European player. Only the companies that are not registered in Europe, so for example, in an energy community country, they will not be asked to provide this information. As mentioned before, we have different entities that are issuing this EIC code. We have ENTSO-E, we have ENTSO-G, we have also the liaison officer. So you can ask to all these entities to provide you the EIC code. We have been told that the process is not really cumbersome. Once all the information has been provided, normally it takes 2 working days to receive the EIC code. You will receive this presentation, and in this presentation, I put also the link of the ENTSO-E webpage in which you can provide more, or you can obtain more information on the EIC code. Once your company has been registered, you will have to register also the user that will be allowed to be active on the behalf of the company. In this case, you will have to provide us information about the user, and also you will have to provide us for the initial one, the power of attorney, and also the commercial register of your company. Once your first user is registered, this first user will be able to register also additional user. As I mentioned before, these two steps will only must be done only if your company is not registered yet in PRISMA. If your company and your user are already registered, you don't have to perform these steps. If you can go to the next slide. Here we start already with the new steps or new activities that must be done in order to be part in AggregateEU and to be active on this one. First of all, you will have to specify the role of your company. Your company can be a buyer, your company can be a seller, and your company can have both roles. What was mentioned before is in any case relevant. You will not be able to be a seller and a buyer in the same tender. But you can play both roles in different tenders. And after that, we will ask you to give us an information. This is just an information in which location you are aiming to be active. This is something that we would like to have this information in order to structure properly the subsequent steps. We will also ask you to provide us information about which financial securities you will use in the negotiation. So being you a buyer or being you a seller, in any case, we will ask you to provide us just information on which financial security you will present in the negotiation phase. This is an information that we would like to share with the potential counterparties in order to support the negotiation. What you will also have to provide us is the declaration of honor. As mentioned before, every applicant will have to provide information that they fulfill the requirement of the Council regulation. And this will be done by this declaration of honor. If we can go to the next one. Here you have a list of the financial security that we have identified together with DG Energy. It's the current list. Maybe will be extended in the upcoming weeks, but at the moment we identify the following financial collateral. You have cash collateral, letter of credit, bank guarantees, parent company guarantees, standby letter of credit, bonds and debt security, open to use a broker, open to use a clearinghouse, credit rating only if it's BB minus or above. We will ask you just to give us an indication. We will not ask you which amount of collaterals you are planning to use in your negotiation. This is just an information, and we will provide this information to a potential counterpart. You will have a possibility to indicate one or more of these financial securities. It's your choice. What is important, if at the moment your company doesn't have one of these financial collateral, it's important that your company will start to negotiate with institutions on having these financial instruments. Maybe there will be also some additional information coming from AggregateEU, but at the moment, if you don't have it, we just ask you to start the process to have, because it's an information and an element that is absolutely needed in the negotiation with a potential counterparty. If we can go to the next one. As mentioned before, in PRISMA, in AggregateEU, we will allow individual company to be active, but also consortium. What will be needed that one company will play the role of a consortium leader, and this company will have to register on PRISMA platform and also subscribe to AggregateEU. What this consortium leader will have to do also is to indicate all the members of the consortium, and this indication will have to be done on AggregateEU. In addition, the consortium leader will have to collect and maintain the declaration of honor of all the members of the consortium. This information will not have to be provided to AggregateEU in the initial phase. Maybe it will be asked by DG Energy if needed, but it's something that the consortium leader will have to collect and maintain in time. Just to clarify, the consortium leader will have to be registered and to be the subscriber in AggregateEU. What the consortium leader can also do, be the leader of more than one consortium. That means that in the subsequent process that I will describe to you, the consortium leader will have to identify which is the consortium for which he is acting on behalf. We can go to the next slide, please. Now we start to illustrate which are the standard products that DG Energy identified as basic principle or basic unit of AggregateEU. We have two different kinds of products. One is virtual LNG. We identify, or DG Energy identify, two different locations. One is Northwest Europe, and the second one is Southeast Europe. The unity that will be the base of demand aggregation and tender and matching will be energy unit. It will be gigawatt hour. The minimum period will be a month, and the duration will be 12 months. Rolling in the sense that the process will be repeated, so the 12 months will be on a rolling base. On the other side, so on the European side, on the continent, we will have virtual trading point, and where there are not virtual trading points, we might have national balancing points. The unit also in this case is the energy unit. It will be gigawatt hour. The period will be also in this case month, and also the duration will be 12 months rolling. On these national trading points, we will suggest the potential counterparty, buyer and seller, to use as standard terms the IFED standard agreement, the general agreement that has been prepared by IFED and is the base on the majority of the concluded contract in Europe. So just to clarify, the virtual trading point, the LNG virtual point, it's a point or 2 points that are not related to a specific LNG terminal at the beginning. We can go to the next one. Thanks. Demand aggregation. Which information a potential buyer will have to submit to the platform? First of all, you will have to specify for which point, for which location you would like to buy gas. You can submit one demand for your company and one demand if you are representing a consortium, or if you are representing more consortium, one demand for each consortium. You will have the possibility to change and withdraw your demand till the submission period is open. DG Energy identified two minimum quantity for the demand submission, one for the VTPs in the continent, and this minimum demand will be between 5 and 10 gigawatt hour per month per location. The number is still under assessment, so at the moment we have a range, as I said, between 5 and 10. For the two virtual LNG location, the minimum size will be 300 gigawatt hour. And the possibility, you will have a possibility for each location to submit 12 bids, one for each month of the entire duration. What we are planning to do at the moment is that the first month of the negotiation will be month plus 2. So if we will start in May, you will have a possibility to bid. We skip June, July, you will start bidding for August. What is important is that the combination between location and month will represent an individual tender. We can go to the next one. So once again, some important information for the potential buyer. The potential buyer will be fully responsible of the transportation of the gas from the delivery point to the consumption point, and in case it is needed, you will be responsible of finding the capacity for regasifying the gas and to store the gas. And as I said, it's a responsibility completely on the buyer. If the buyer, it was mentioned before, doesn't have this know-how, we will suggest the buyer to get in contact with shipper on behalf. We, as mentioned before, we are going to publish a request of interest for potential shipper on behalf, and the shipper on behalf that will be interested to offer these services will be included in one specific list that will be available on PRISMA platform. The expression of interest, this request that will come from PRISMA, will be probably available in calendar week 12. So once again, responsibility will be fully on the buyer, on the potential buyer, and in case your company doesn't have this know-how to manage all the logistics for moving the gas from the delivery point to the consumption point, we will provide you shipper on behalf, which could offer these services for you. We can go to the next slide. Now we go into the matching algorithm. Also, in designing the algorithm together with DG Energy, we thought about which principles should be the pillar of the algorithm, and we identify the following principle. Every tender must be independent. So every single tender process will be independent. We must not discriminate between potential buyers, and every potential buyer shall be treated equally and having the same quality of matching. The algorithm shall also minimize the cost for potential buyer. That means in the matching process, we will prioritize the willingness to sell of a potential seller from the cheapest one to the most expensive one. And finally, in case we will have a situation of over-demand or oversupply, we will apply a pro rata mechanism. So these were the guiding principles, the 5 guiding principles that we identified with DG Energy before we start designing the solution. If we can go to the next one. Here you see the information that a potential seller will have to provide for one specific tender. So the potential seller will have information about the tender. In this case, we have an example in which the location is TRF, so the virtual training point in France. The month is May 2023. The quantity of the aggregated demand is 16,000 gigawatt hour. These are the information that we provide to the potential seller before the tender process starts. Now, the potential seller will have to provide to the AggregateEU platform the quantity that they are willing to sell for this specific tender, the price, these are 2 mandatory information, and also the validity, this is an optional information, the validity of the bid, of the willingness to sell. In this case, you can, if you're interested, you can provide an information that we will be used in the subsequent process, and we will provide to the potential buyer as additional information. The potential seller can submit more than 1 bid. Obviously, we expect that if one potential seller submits multiple bids, these bids will have different prices. But this is not a must-have condition. Also, in this case, the potential seller will have the possibility to modify, to edit their bids until the submission window is open. And after that, the information is not editable anymore. If we can go to the next slide. Maybe we scroll completely to the presentation. This is an illustrative example how the algorithm could look like. We are in a situation of overdemand. It's a very simple example. We have two potential buyers, buyer A and buyer B. Both buyers indicate a demand, individual demand of 400 units. And in this case, we have also two sellers, seller C and seller D. The seller C is willing to sell 300 units at a price of 150. The seller D is willing to sell 400 units at a price of 180. As mentioned before, the algorithm will give priority to the seller with the lowest price. So the first bid of the seller C at 300 at 150 will have priority, matching priority, and the second one of the seller D will be the second in the merit order. What we will do, we will allocate pro rata the quantity of seller C to buyer A and buyer B. That means that both buyers will get 150 units at a price of 150. And after that, we will do the same also with the willingness to sell to the quantities of seller D. And in this case, we will allocate to buyer A and buyer B 200 units at a price of 180. Using this algorithm, what we will guarantee that every single buyer will have the same condition, the same average price, and we are going to give them the lowest price as possible, being treated equally. As mentioned before, as this specific case is an over-demand case, we will allocate pro rata the offer of the potential seller. And also, in this specific case, the result will be that both, because in this specific case, both buyers, express the same demand. In any case, the percentage of unsatisfied demand will be equal for both buyers. So, as I said before, this algorithm is meant to treat all the potential buyers equally and provide the same condition to the potential buyer. Condition, prices, that are just indications, because this matching is not binding. Both, in this scenario, both buyer and both seller will have to sit together and start the negotiation. If we can go to the next slide, please. Here you have an information about which information the platform will provide to the potential buyer. We have two different cases, the case of the virtual LNG and the case of the VTP or national balancing points. In the case of the virtual LNG, to every single potential buyer, we will provide the information about all the other companies that have been successfully allocated. Why this one? Because we would like to support the cooperation in managing the logistics, and we thought that giving the information to the potential buyers, or which will be other potential buyers in this tender process, this could help the creation of cooperation for managing the logistics of the virtual LNG. Obviously, we will provide the information about all the seller that has been matched. In the case of the VTP national balancing points, we will provide only the information about the potential seller. Obviously, in both cases, we will also provide information about the quantity that has been matched and the indication about the average price of the matched position. To conclude this slide, the only difference between the two sets of locations is that at the virtual LNG, we will provide you more information in order to support the negotiation, the cooperation between potential buyers in order to manage the logistics. If we can go to the next one. Which information we will provide to the potential seller. In this case, we will provide the general information about the buyer, so the name and so on, the quantities that have been allocated, the price, obviously, in this case, will be the price that the seller identified at the beginning. And what is important for the seller, we will also provide the information about the financial securities that have been indicated during the subscription process, by the potential buyer. As I mentioned, this is just an information, doesn't have any reference to the quantity and price that have been matched. If you can go to the next one. So this is the matching process. After the matching process, there will be the part that is completely outside AggregateEU, that is the negotiation between the potential buyer and potential seller. Hopefully, this negotiation will conclude with the subscription of several contracts, and as defined by the regulation, the counterparties will have to provide information to AggregateEU about the concluded contract. The information that you will have to provide concerning the concluded contract is the location or locations, the quantity or quantities, and the period of the concluded contract. As you may see, we are not going to ask you information about prices. What we will do after you will register this information, we will provide this information to DG Energy. And they might also check this with a remit obligation. What is clear that AggregateEU will not provide any remit services to the contracting parties. This will have to be performed directly by the contracting parties. So you will have to provide the remit relevant information directly to ACER. Here I want to give you a first highlight of the tendering process, starting from the submission until the reporting. So the first phase will be the submission of demand. You will have 3 days in order to submit your demand. Once the submission of demand is concluded, we will aggregate all the demand and we will provide the information about the aggregated demand to DG Energy that will perform controls in order to avoid any kind of manipulation of AggregateEU. Once DG Energy perform its analysis and its evaluation, the demand aggregation phase will finish and we will publish the information about the tenders. This will be in day 10. In day 11, they will start the tender process, so the potential seller will have the possibility to submit the bids. We foresee at the moment 3 days for the submission of the bids. In these 3 days, as I said before, the potential seller will have the possibility to edit the bids. Once the submission window of these 3 days is over, we will start the matching process. We will match demand and supply, and also in this case, we will provide the information to DG Energy. Once the matching is finished, we will provide the result and we will publish the result to the participating companies. Once this will be in day 16. Once this phase is over, you will start the bilateral negotiation that is, as I said before, is completely out of AggregateEU. That's the reason why we don't indicate any deadline for the start of the reporting. It will be based on how fast the companies, the counterparties will be able to conclude the negotiation. In any case, once you conclude the negotiation, once the companies will conclude the negotiation, the reporting phase will start. To be clear, the days are considered like calendar days from Monday to Friday without any differentiation. One final information from my side, when we expect to go live with different streams, what we agreed with DG Energy is that we will not have one unique go live, but we will have several go lives in order to make the process as flexible as possible and to start as soon as possible with the initial steps. So the registration hopefully will be concluded soon. We expect that the go live will be in mid of April. The second step will be the aggregation of demand and transparency. This is something that we plan to start late April, maybe earlier May. So as you can see, we will give you few weeks to start the registration and the subscription steps. Hopefully these steps, not hopefully, these steps will have to be concluded before the demand aggregation will start. The tendering process, that is the third step, it's at the moment plan by mid-late May. And the last steps, that is the transparency, is operational end of May. So these are the 4 steps. As I said before, DG Energy is planning not to have one-shot process, but recurrent processes, always with this month plus 2 and 12 months of period. So it means that the first one will be month plus 2, month plus 14th, and so on. These are at the moment the plan deadlines for going live with AggregateEU. What we also agreed with DG Energy is to provide you and keep you informed as soon as possible. We have created a specific page on AggregateEU in which we are already providing information to the interested party. If you are interested, you can already subscribe to this information channel. You just have to go on this link. It will be available on the presentation, and include your name, your email, your organization, and specify to which phase of AggregateEU you are interested in. We will try to publish all the relevant documentation via this channel. I think this was my last.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for this very informative presentation. I think there is a lot of details that we have been hearing. You have also sent us your questions. What we planned at the beginning and what I propose now is that we go on a 10-minute break. We will, you can continue sending your questions through the chat. We are putting them together, and just right after the break, then we start replying to those and providing you the information that you requested. So with that, it's on our watch, it's 11:12, and let's be unusual. I would say that at 11:22 we will be again on the screen and we'll start replying to your messages. Thanks a lot. So still good morning, colleagues. So as promised, 22 past 11, and then we are going to get into the Q&A session. The Q&A session will be moderated by my colleague Maciej next to me, and we will start with the answering the questions that we have received beforehand in writing, and then we will go into the questions that you've been putting into the chat, and we'll try to address them block by block, depending on the topic. So the floor is yours, Maciej.
Oh. We start with PRISMA. Good late morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the questions received in advance of the meeting. It helped us structure the presentation with colleagues from PRISMA. It helped us see where the key interest and question marks remain. We will now go through major points raised in written in advance. And later on, we will try grouping the questions according to the areas of the presentation. And we will be addressing directly the questions from the chat and giving you the possibility for each area to also ask additional questions ad hoc. Now I pass the floor to colleagues from PRISMA for the written questions, please.
So, a couple of questions have been prepared already. Paulo, do you want to introduce?
If we can put the presentation.
Okay, I'll take the minute this takes to show up to also wish you good morning. My name is Christian Waltermann. I'm also with PRISMA, and this is the first half of the questions that were handed in advance, and we'll just go through them one by one, and I'll see if I can answer those. I think most of them sort of have been covered in the presentation already, but just let's see that we didn't miss anything on those. So first question, can a supplier offer volume less than the total tender demand for a time period location? The answer is yes. Basically, that will then result in a pro rata split, as we've seen, depending also on the number of sellers and people active on that location in that specific tender in that time period. I would just go through these one by one. If there are remaining aspects open at the end, I suggest you put them in the chat box again, and then we'll just group these in the later Q&A. So second question, what happens if supply exceeds demand but is not exactly matched? So we'll have the pro rata mechanism in play again there, and I think Paulo had an example on that. So we would have basically both sellers offering something, but this would depend on the price they're actually giving. So a preferential price would also be, or the best price would be allocated first, depending really on the number of buyers also active in that scenario. What are the obligations of prospective sellers? What happens when where parties can't agree fully? So the suggestion basically is to use the IFED standard conditions when it comes to the VTP. So basically what we're suggesting at that point is that the obligations that are indicated in there are applying. In terms of LNG, the idea is that transportation of the ship is basically the responsibility of the buyer. So that's where also the whole agent on behalf mechanism comes into play, which we heard about before. But these are indications. So basically contracting is done outside the platform. This is what is just going to be the starting ground that for negotiations that we're putting in place. So next question, what are obligations on potential buyers? How does a seller know potential buyers have any intention of entering into an agreement? So there is no there's no requirement for a buyer to go into matching. There is a requirement to go into demand aggregation, but this demand can actually be withdrawn at the end of the aggregation phase. So this does not go into matching. And therefore, we expect that only people who are really interested in continuing on are going to end up in a matching and have really the intention of negotiating and concluding a contract. So next point, when will the anticipated terms and conditions term sheet will be published? So the terms and conditions in terms of the platform there, as Paolo pointed out, they'll be given as part of the guidance documentation with the go live of the platform. So this can be reviewed. In terms of a term sheet, if this is meant in the sense what conditions actually are applied to a contract, this is more something we expect to happen in the contracting phase. As said before, the information that is coming out of matching is basically can be seen as a starting point for these negotiations. Next question, can the buyer include further required associated T&Cs in any offer? So not explicit, this is not something explicitly foreseen in the on the platform side, in the sense that this we have to make sure that this is the complexity, like we cannot go into too much complexity on that end, and also this two specific offerings won't result in too into too many deals. But this is something that could then happen during the contracting phase, which is and I'm repeating myself, done outside the platform. Then next question, how will the delivery price be reached and the clearing of transactions? So that is basically an area where we don't want to intervene in terms of the regular market mechanisms. So all the usual mechanisms can be used, such as brokerage, such as using a clearinghouse. These are also mechanisms which you can indicate in your list of financial securities during subscriptions that you are intending to use one of these mechanisms to go there. Then the next question, what will be the mechanism for securing collateral for the transaction? That is basically something that's going to happen on a company individual level. So this is not something that the platform manages. This is up to basically your individual initiative. The next question, a bit longer, who will be the guarantor of that the transaction will take place as long as the purchase and sales contracts will be concluded outside the platform? Before whom will the transactions be settled in case of failed delivery and or bad faith behavior of any of the parties to the transaction? So basically, this is then really also pushing, looking at the contracting phase. So there are different established market mechanisms you could use for this, but we would not put something on top of these market mechanisms on the platform. Last question on this slide, will there be standardized products such profile and duration that will continue to be requested, or will demand and supply side request aggregation process accept any requests? What will be the procedure in case when? So this is a couple of questions. So starting with the first one, in terms of standardized products, I think we heard the general idea of a monthly product, either on a VTP or on one of the two LNG virtual points. So this implying a monthly value, which would result for in the VTP or basically for a flat on a flat, would result in a flat curve. And obviously with LNG being delivered at a more discrete point of time, this will translate into unloading, but the numbers are meant as the whole monthly figure to be delivered in that month. What will the procedure in case of aggregating non-standard products will be the procedure in case when aggregating non-standard products? So we won't aggregate non-standard products, basically the short answer. These we are using the ones that we just outlined. And I think that is also covering the last bit. So we're not, basically sticking to the suggestions that we had out there, that were outlined before. Then maybe let's go to the next slide. what will be the counter obligations between buyer, seller, and aggregator? So I'm not quite sure what is meant by aggregator at this point. So basically, I just want to say again, reiterate that AggregateEU is not going to play part in contracting. So we're not a new central counterparty or something like this. So we would expect that quite a few of the contracts are done on a bilateral basis, so as an OTC trade, but you could envision doing this all kinds of different ways. This is basically up to you, and the obligations will be derived from the mechanism you choose. Next section, what will be the capacity requirements to the specific delivery point should buyers and sellers have secured capacities to the given delivery point for which supply and demand aggregation is being done. If there's no such obligation, how will it be ensured that the seller will deliver and the buyer will receive the relevant quantities at the particular delivery point if they do not have pre-provision capacity or insufficient capacity, giving the challenges. So we are aware of the challenges. In general, the principle that we're applying in these products is that the transportation complexity falls on the buyer. So he is the one entering into the obligation to get the gas to the desired location. As I said, we are aware of the complexity, and at that point, we really want to manage the cooperation models that were outlined before. So the agent on behalf of the central buyer, to help smaller players who could not do this by themselves get closer to the market and participate in these transactions. So this is the way we want to go about this. So leverage the existing know-how and capabilities that are in the market. Then the next question, how long before delivery should quantities be requested through the platform? So basically, it's also covered before, I think. So you have the demand aggregation starting late April, early May, and then you have a 2-month lead time for basically the first delivery month. And then it will really depend on your need in the sense when you actually need that gas to be delivered. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers that one. I think for the next question, I would hand that back to DG Anna. I think you're more prepared to answer on that one.
Yeah, so Christian can take over here. So the next question is, I would like to clarify if the participation of each member state to actively participate is mandatory. If yes, quantity brought are only for the storage purpose or can be used as well to satisfy the portfolio of end user demand or for the trading purposes during the summer. So the Article 10 of the Council regulation provide all elements in relation to the mandatory use of the service provider. It put the obligation on the member states to actually aggregate the demand and define who will be the entities actually, let's say, that will need to go on demand aggregation. So the obligation is on the member states to define who are the entity that will participate on the demand aggregation side. The use of the gas is left purposefully open, meaning that the gas is not necessarily for injection in the gas storage and can also be for other uses, meaning direct consumption or resale. It's just the quantities that are indicated in the regulation are indeed binding when it comes to the mandatory use of the platform. And the last one, it's for you, Christian, or will you take it?
As you wish.
Okay, you can take it.
All right. So our companies registered as buyers able to see the aggregated demand from other consortium buyers for the same specific tender, confidentiality aspects, compliant requirements. So in terms of compliance requirements, part of that is covered in the subscription phase. So we have the DOH stating, among other things, the not having a presence of Russian control in there. the point where the confidentiality is generally the platform is designed in a way so that the information that is shared among participants is only done on a necessary basis. And with this have in mind, in case of VTP, this is you can only really see your own demand at that point. And the aggregated demand, but not the individual demand from other buyers. And in the case of LNG, as outlined before, there is the possibility to also see the other companies in order to facilitate the transaction there and to partner up at that point of the process. Yeah, I'm not sure, DJ Laura, if you want to add anything to this, but otherwise this would basically conclude it from my end.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very good start to the Q&A session. Dear all, we have covered now presentation of PRISMA. We have gone through most frequently asked questions in written before the meeting. Now I want to propose two things. First of all, when we go to Q&A, as we are 340 people in the call, in the video conference, we would like to suggest to structure it along 4 elements. One will be everything which is concepts, which is demand aggregation as such, who can participate in registration. The second one will be matching. The third one will be contracting. And finally, procurement and transparency and any other questions we may have. Before we go to questions we identified in the chat, I want to draw your attention that if you have still, if you would like to read something and some of the questions, you can refer to our FAQs. They are quite complementary and quite robust. Colleague Robin is now putting them in the chat. We invite you to study them and to read them after this meeting. So, starting with the Q&As, at first we would like to present better what are the main concepts we've been using. We've seen questions about concepts such as shipper on behalf, agent on behalf, central buyer. We think it's important to come back to this and to explain in simple words what is behind these concepts, what is the same or what is not. So I would like to ask Bartek to say a few words as simple as possible about shipper and agent on behalf, as well as central buyer and consortium leader, to make sure that we understand the concepts properly.
Yes, thank you, Maciek. Indeed, I think there is. We still are adjusting. I think the various names, and this comes out because in different fora we used to use different names. So, agent on behalf and shipper on behalf is the same thing. Agent on behalf was more the theoretical consideration. Shipper on behalf is how we want to how we also discuss it specifically for the transport. But basically this is the same concept. I think maybe using agent on behalf will be more appropriate because it's not only about transport, it might also be about balancing, it might also be about some additional services that companies may want to advertise in order to help conclude the contracts. So maybe indeed using agent on behalf is a little bit broader issue. We will be discussing with PRISMA also how to categorize all the services that the call and expression of interest will include, so that we can become clearer. Then the second concepts were the consortium leader and the central buyer. This is also the same concept basically. I think really there we will come up with one name, but it is indeed the same concept. The point is here that one company, and I think maybe indeed this consortium leader or the central buyer will need to register himself on the platform as it was explained, and then take then also its group of buyers into the demand aggregation. So sorry for the confusion, but these are the groups of concepts.
Thank you, Bartek. Is there any other question on the concepts before we move on to the other aspects of demand aggregation? Well done, Bartek. Thank you. All is clarified on that front. Now, there was a question in the chat asking quite a general but a very good question. Is this another trading place, another trading hub? And I think presentation of PRISMA and the additional presentations showed the value added and how different it is from existing places. There is this aspect of bringing individual demand together, also the cooperation mechanisms that Bartek just was representing. So if you want to know more about this, I invite you to study also the FAQs, but I hope that with the presentation we did show that this is bringing a new element to the paysage of the European gas market. Now, several questions popped up during the presentation on the regularity of the tenders, also on the minimum value of demand, if it is per entity or per consortium. I think colleagues addressed the question that the regularity will be monthly. The minimum value is per entity, is demand declared by the entity. But I would like to ask Laurent to say just a few more words on what if there is the minimum demand already identified, we're still working on it. What if entities have lower demand than the minimum threshold? Will they be able to participate, or is it for the earlier bringing together of this smaller demand to be able to participate in AggregateEU?
So, thank you, Maciej. So all entities, independently of the gas demand, are able to register on the platform. If their monthly gas demand is below the threshold that has been indicated by the colleagues of PRISMA, they will be invited to actually use the service of a central buyer in order to proceed with the purchase on the platform, or to find any kind of cooperation mechanism with other entities, this being done outside of the platform. So the idea is that independently of your quantity, you can find a service or group with other companies in order to meet this minimum demand and to act on the platform. Just to come back a bit on the timing. So indeed, the product will be tendered on, so it's going to be monthly product. So you will have a window of 12 months. So for every demand aggregation stage and tendering stage, there will be a window of 12 months. You can submit your demand for every month of this 12 months framework. And the tendering process will be organized per month, per point, being the virtual LNG, northwest, southeast, or the national balancing point. And this will be on the rolling basis. So there is an intent to actually repeat the process every second month, this demand aggregation and tendering process every second month. And for every iteration, you will have a window of 12 months to submit your demand.
Thank you. Laurent, are there any questions on this aspect before we move on? There's a question if any virtual trading point can be indicated. Christian, can you take this one? PRISMA, please.
Christian, you're on mute.
Yep, I was just waiting for the central unmute button. Sorry. So basically, can any VTP be used? We were looking now, I think, at 27 VTPs in total. So basically, all of these locations can be leveraged. And with regard to LNG, yeah, the obvious two ones, yeah. So you have to choose from a list, but I'm confident we have the prominent ones on there.
There is a question about potential buyers who have too low or very low demand. Do they need to register? And Laurent, can you mention that?
So if the demand of an entity is below the minimum in order to go to demand aggregation, this entity can use the service of a central buyer that the entity can find on AggregateEU. It can also link up with other companies who intend to join forces in order to purchase gas on AggregateEU.
Nothing to add, absolutely.
On the question if it is possible to just participate in monthly buying process and not 12 months, I think it is the reply is straightforward. Yes, it's possible to participate one-off. I will ask colleagues from PRISMA to maybe clarify once again how it is with the monthly plus one and this 12 months rolling process.
So maybe I'll take that one. So the, sorry, Paolo. So M+2 to M+14 is the idea. So basically with the current idea of starting in May, this would give us then July as the first month. You could place demand for, and then have this continue on basically for a whole year. So then June of the next year would be the last one. And then, you know, if we, as Laura indicated, if we would repeat the process 2 months later, then this will basically also be postponed by 2 months. So you start with the first month then as September, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Thank you. A very relevant and practical question about registration. When does it start? And will it, do participants need to wait till beginning of April or sooner?
So as mentioned before, we are planning to go live with the registration mid of April, especially with a second step of a subscription to the AggregateEU. If parties are not registered yet on PRISMA, they could start already with the initial step, that is the registration. This is already possible.
To add to that, the one limitation that there is, you would need currently an EIC code if you wanted to start registration right now. So if you in one of the countries not not really having these EIC codes, then you are going to have to wait until the official start of the registration. That is going to take this into account as well.
To clarify, it's a two-step approach actually. So you have a registration on the platform, and then afterward, where you provide the POA, which is needs to be signed by a qualified electronic signature, for example. And then in the second step, by subscribing to the service, you also would have to provide this declaration on honor also to be signed. So this is a two-step process.
I see that the question about on small consumers and the need for registration is coming back. Can we please, colleagues from PRISMA, once again explain the registration needs?
Fad, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, everybody does that actually wants to procure or to place a demand via the platform needs to be registered, yes, but there, of course, please consider and bear in mind that once we have the a minimum threshold defined, and you already know that you are below the threshold, you would not need to register yourself. So please then ask, as Laurent also mentioned, the central buyer or the consortium, whatever, so that you can aggregate your demand already there, that you meet the minimum threshold for the demand, and then you can place it. And then, of course, the consortium leader or the central buyers, they need to register. I hope this answers the question.
All right. There's a question if DG Ener is thinking to run the process on a recurrent basis. Not sure I understand the question. I mean, I think the message is yes, it will be a recurrent basis for the next 12 months, and it will be these 12 months will be on the rolling basis. But is the question, if the person asking the question can clarify if it is about the future of the platform, if it will be a permanent process, or if it is limited in time? If there is no more information, we consider that the question was already replied to. It will be on recurrent basis.
So I think there is a question on when the call for expression of interest for central buyer, we use, let's say, the terminology central buyer will be launched. We are planning to do it in the upcoming weeks. So the plan is week 12, and calendar week 12.
And will it be published?
It will be published on AggregateEU platform, the link that you saw in the last slide.
Very good. So this will be public information which will come in time before actually the launch of the tenders. Okay, now question from Elizaveta Badanova about the credentials to be provided by the parties, such as financial stability, available capacity. I would like that we move on, and we will address the question later on, because we are still in the first part of the discussion. I would like that we now move to the matching section, if you don't mind. This will bring us closer also to the algorithm, how the price is being set up, to the contracting. So in the chat before, we have seen questions about the matching, about how the resulting average price is constructed, about the algorithm, if it's automatic or not. I think colleagues from PRISMA addressed the topic and also how objectively this will be the outcome. The algorithm will be creating the outcome. But maybe PRISMA could once again very shortly describe the matching process and the resulting price.
So the matching process will be performed taking consideration the aggregated demand and also the individual bids for selling gas, ranking these bids from the cheapest one to the most expensive one. And we will start allocating the cheapest one using the pro rata mechanism to all the potential buyers. And once this quantity of the cheapest quantity of gas is allocated, we will go to the next cheapest one, the second cheapest one, and this process will be repeated until the demand is fully allocated. So with this logic, we are guaranteeing the same condition to all the potential buyer. That means the same percentage of the individual demand is allocated, and every potential buyer will have the same average price. Being the same average price an indication because the price information of the potential seller is not binding and is subject to negotiation between the counterparties.
Thank you. So this is the matching process, and we are distinguishing this from the contracting phase, which will be happening later on and outside of the Aggregate EU itself. Are there any questions related directly to the matching before we move to the contracting? We have a question from Cyril to everyone, which is a buyer buying at 10 can have an average price at 12. Not sure we fully understand the question, unless you do.
The potential buyer is not submitting any price information. The potential buyer is just submitting quantities. So in the example of the colleagues, the 10 is not an information that is on the platform. The 12, that is the matching of the individual bids of the potential seller, is the price, the average price that we will disclose to the potential buyers. So the 10 is an information that we don't register we don't ask on AggregateEU. The buyer will just have to submit the quantities.
Thank you. This is clear. Any other questions to colleagues from PRISMA on the tendering itself? On the matching, sorry. If not, okay, there is a question about the firmness of the offers from the sellers in the platform. So this allows us to move to the contracting stage. And I think, as it was already signaled earlier today, it will be for the parties to find an agreement and contracting. Colleagues from PRISMA, would you like to say anything more about the firmness of the offers?
The price information is used to create the matching between the potential buyer and potential seller. As you mentioned, after that, the counterparties will have to sit together, and I hope they will conclude contract based on the information that have been provided by the AggregateEU. But this is not guaranteed. So the firmness is not guaranteed by the AggregateEU.
Thank you. Now moving to the contracting itself, it will be happening outside of the platform, but an element relevant for the contracting, which is coming up today and in our conversations in other fora, is related to the financial capability of the buyers, creditworthiness, and also today we saw questions on what is the meaning of the financial element in the AggregateEU. What if the buyers who are grouped together through the AggregateEU, if they have different creditworthiness? I would like to ask Clément, our colleague dealing with this aspect, to shed a bit more light on what is happening in the situation, what is AggregateEU informing of in terms of financial capability of the buyers. Please.
Thank you, Maciek. Indeed, on the subject, we know that a potential buyer will face requirements from the sellers linked to the credit risk. So what the platform will do is, first of all, collect information about how the buyers intend to finance or guarantee the purchase price. So you will have several options, which were listed in the presentation, including types of guarantees and financing options, including, of course, the standby letters of credit, which are, we understand, the most common form of support that you can provide. But it's only information to be collected. You will then have to provide these elements to the seller during the contracting phase outside of the platform. If you don't already have any of these products, or if you never secured any of these products in the past, we really advise you to contact your local banks, because these products are mostly available with financial institutions, to start negotiating with them upfront what it would cost and how long it would take to provide them, and then you will need to evidence this with the seller during the contracting phase. On top of that, what the platform will actually do is that we will, and we are in contact with international financial institutions and national promotional banks to assess whether some of them would be willing to help you secure this product and help you securing them at a lower cost. We don't know yet what would be the outcome of this exercise, but whatever willing institution we find will be listed on the platform. This being said, we still advise you to contact your local commercial bank because these financial institutions, the public financial institutions, will have limitations in terms of mandate and geographies. So our advice is really to contact your banks and start discussing with them how you intend to finance or guarantee the purchase price of the gas.
Thank you, Clément. As this is a very specific part of the contracting, I would like to ask for questions. If there are more questions on the financial aspects on creditworthiness, please come up with them now. Okay, thanks, Clément. That was very clear. Now moving on the contracting questions. Earlier today in the chat, we saw a question on will there be standard contracts? Will there be any contracts proposed by AggregateEU? And here, my colleague Bartek will explain the difference between the contracts for LNG and contracting on the virtual point. We already addressed it before with the EFET contract, but Bartek, if you could very simply reply to this again. And at the same time, Bartek, if you could address a question, what if during the contracting, there are, for example, 5 buyers and one of the buyers, for whatever reason, does not continue further discussions? What does it mean for the contracting? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Maciek. Indeed, we had also in our discussion with our industrial advisory group raised the issue of standard contracts. Obviously, on the side of the pipelines, they are when gas is coming through pipelines, we know that EFET, the European Federation of Energy Traders, made an attempt, and there are standard clauses, standard templates to sign such contracts for pipelines. The situation in the LNG is different because simply the variety of elements that need to be taken into account are much bigger, and what we understand, there is no such template available. However, EFET made an attempt also to have some clauses around this contract, and this is what we are going to further look at. In the ideal situation, we will be collecting this potential clauses to also facilitate the contract. This is still an ongoing work, and we are continuing it. If there is a situation that one of the buyers fall out of the contract, this is something that of course then will need to be readdressed during the negotiations. It very much depends really whether this one buyer is then addressing the seller on its own, and it simply falls out, and then there is some gas that is not being discussed or negotiated, so there is a volume that needs to be still reattributed. The second situation is if there are maybe more companies linked to, in case of like in terms of central buyer. But if there is a central buyer having contracts with several companies, one of them will simply drop out, then it's of course an issue of terms of reference and the contracting between the central buyer and the single company. if the situation is that a buyer doesn't simply sign a contract with a seller, then yes, this situation is gone, and then that volume will not be simply contracted. It might be that then the seller returns in the next tender again to the platform. I don't know whether, Paulo, you want to add anything on that? No, okay.
That was very exhaustive. Thanks, Bartek. In the chat, we saw also a question about liability, such as non-delivery, for example. So just to repeat, AggregateEU will not be taking this liability on themselves. It is between the contracting parties with all the legal risks, with the reputational risks, where this has to be addressed. Now we are moving to the transparency section, but so far we haven't seen many questions on this aspect. So I suggest before we conclude, we will move to any other questions which did not fit in previous categories. And we have noted down a number of questions of that type. There was one on the origin of gas and how it will be verified. I will pass the floor to Monica Zigri on this one. And also on the price spikes of the mechanism, there are also some further questions on delivery points. But let's start with the origin of gas and how this will be verified. Monica, please.
Thank you, Maciek. First of all, in the regulation, we do have a few articles making sure that no Russian gas reaches the EU through the platform. And as such, when it comes to the tenders on the VTP, there is a list of interconnection points through which gas cannot be offered, and this makes sure that when it comes to Russian gas through pipelines, it is not delivered on the VTP. Of course, the LNG market is somewhat more challenging. However, we do possess market intelligence, and we have several tools to follow the LNG cargoes. We also are aware of several companies that do have Russian LNG in their portfolio, and then that is the type. Through this information, we will aim at ensuring that no Russian LNG is offered on the platform.
Thank you, Monica. Now, there is indeed a question on transparency, and let me briefly address it. So there will be transparency between the AggregateEU and the Commission, but in terms of transparency vis-à-vis the market, we do not intend to publish sensitive contractual information. Whatever would be published would be in aggregated form to show the overall results of the AggregateEU and of the process, but it will not allow to obtain granular, sensitive commercial information, who contracted with whom, at which price, etc. Moving on, there was a question about price spikes and what impact AggregateEU and particular tenders could have on the market. We do not believe that there would be a big impact in this direction. It should not be different than any other market contracting at the same time. Would you like to add more to this, Laurent?
No, just to indicate that concur with this assessment that the mechanism and the nature of the step approach for the demand aggregation and the tendering will indeed avoid a situation where the demand expressed would be artificially high, and therefore we do not expect that it will have adverse market behavior.
Yeah, Monica.
Just a last compliment. The overall regulation also has a transparency provision, and one of the main aims of this provision is improve coordination of tendering, and this through this provision, we would like to make sure that even if other member states or entities are planning with tenders, we are aware of that, and we will try and recommend those to actually come through the platform or try to merge their intention with the tenders that are launched on the platform, and with this have a more coordinated approach from which we would expect that we can address the potential risk of price hikes.
Thank you. Colleagues, apologies that we are jumping a bit, but questions are coming in the chat. So we are coming back to the financial incentives and to the banking and financial support. So as the Commission, we have, in the context of the EU Energy Platform, we have engaged with a wide range of financial institutions, international financial institutions, national banks, promotional banks, commercial banks, and we continue these discussions to make sure that no stone is unturned, and then basically if it is identified that this aspect is something blocking the demand aggregation of certain players in the platform, we'll do our best to make sure that at least they will have access to information and to the financial services. I cannot at this stage announce that we have any particular financial support coming from the EU side. Is the tool which we are providing together with PRISMA. But Clément, maybe you would like to say a little bit more on the specifics of this question, on which products exactly are being considered and what are the requirements of the banks, because we have checked this quite in detail.
Yes, thank you, Maciek. I think, first of all, the question on the requirements on the seller side regarding the quality of the banks, this precisely would be a requirement from the seller. They will be the ones deciding the type of banks that could issue a product which is acceptable for them. But we expect that they will request first-class international commercial banks as a standard issuer. So indeed, if your local banks, if you feel that your local bank is of an insufficient quality, then maybe you should exchange with them and see if you could enter into contact with a new bank. But the quality of the product will rely on this, and it will mostly be dependent on what the seller is expecting to receive. And in terms of products, indeed, we have discussed with some commercial banks and the trade finance department about standby letters of credit, but also about credit lines to prepay the purchase price. So there are plenty of options on the markets, but the options will be provided by, indeed, the financial institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Clément. This is ongoing. It will be very important also to receive feedback from participants in AggregateEU. If you face certain difficulties or you would need particular products, it would be interesting for us to learn what prevented some of you from reaping full benefits of the AggregateEU because of this financial aspect. This would be something we'd like to hear about from you. There is a very relevant question about the infrastructure, regasification capacity and transparency on this front. We have identified this early on as a key element which will allow and support AggregateEU and demand aggregation joint purchasing. As part of the regulation of December, we are advancing and proposing improved rules on transparency of the regasification capacity and LNG terminals. And some of it, good news, is already online and supporting the market players. But Bartek will share with you a bit more details on that and where to find this information.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, with the changing flows of gas, in particular lower flows from Russia, capacities on pipelines become available, but at the same time more LNG is coming into Europe, and the efficient use of LNG terminals become also from already months ago quite key. And we had in DG Ener, we were looking at these issues, and in the proposal of the gas decarbonization package, we proposed that information that is relevant to obtain third-party access to the terminals and to gas storages, that this information is being published on a European-wide platform. And GIE, the Gas Infrastructure Europe.org is this platform that is publishing such information. And now since the end of February, all the LNG terminals and gas storages transmit the information on availability of storages, of availability of terminals to this platform. So GIE.org is the we will put also in the chat, is the platform that the information is being published. But, and also together also with information on tariffs. But I think what is here important to make, of course, in order to get a slot in the terminal, this is a quite complex issue, of course this requires also then to contact directly the LNG terminals. And the second point is indeed all the terminals are now also obliged to have secondary capacity booking platforms on their websites, and this is possible as well. Of course, it will be much easier for companies that are normally in this business to do so. And here again, the link to the agent on behalf or shipper on behalf concepts we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bartek. It is a lot of information at once. That's why we invite you. We will send you the presentation. The recording will be available as well. So we invite you to consult this again, as well as FAQs. Also, colleagues from PRISMA, when the AggregateEU is launched and fully operational, will be receptive, of course, to any feedback of the users. We, as the European Commission, will be always available to receive your feedback, even very much so. We would recommend that you actually provide us detailed feedback of what functionalities, what prevents you from reaping the benefits of the platform and of the AggregateEU, and what you would like to see there. We are very open to that. With that, if there are no more burning questions for this session, looking at the chat, anything burning? No, I think everybody's kind of a bit exhausted with this amount of information. But thank you very much for replying to all the questions to colleagues from PRISMA and colleagues from DG Energy. I pass the floor to Monica for closing remarks.
Thank you, Maciek, and thank you very much for your participation today. As I've seen, there were no more questions also in the chat. First of all, thank you to PRISMA for preparing this very detailed presentation. I really hope that you have received a lot of the information that will be useful, and you got the answers to the questions that you had in your head. As was mentioned already by Maciej, we do have a frequently asked questions document on our website, on the Europa website of the Commission, as well as there is a link that PRISMA provided to you on one of the slides where you can register your interest to receive updates on where the process is going and when the new functionality is open, or when the detailed guidelines or guidance on how the system will work will be published. The recording will be also publicly available, so you can always go back. And indeed, we are always ready to answer your specific questions or send you to the person who would be available to answer the specific questions that you may have. We have received also during today a few questions which are more policy related. Those we did on purpose not reply to, as those are not something that are in a direct link with the use of the platform. But those we are always happy to continue discussing, either under the existing fora that we have, the Industry Advisory Group, the Steering Board, etc. But we are also available there on a bilateral basis. With this, I would really like to thank all the team who has been very intensively preparing this meeting, and also big thanks to all the participants also for their very constructive participation and very useful questions that you sent to us. And I hope that depending on time zones, this is the right time to start your lunch breaks. And I really hate to be between you and your lunches. And so with that, I will very quickly just close and have a nice rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you and bye.